We want to sincerely thank all of you for making time to join. We see that more people are trying to join the webinar. As they join, we say welcome to everyone. Today we'll be dealing with something very topical, very important in the work of advocacy. We're dealing with research and policy analysis and strategies for improving advocacy in Nigeria. I want to thank sincerely the USAID and the Palladium Group for the support that they have been giving to ACIOE all the while to enable us run this series of webinars. I would like to call on Mr. Elia, if you have a word to share with us before we proceed. Good morning, Mr. Elia.
Good morning, Henry, and good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks again. Just so that I don't take so much of our time, and to allow us just hit into the business of the day, I want to bring you greetings from the leadership of Scale, and to show our appreciation for all that have been joining into this Scale webinar series. So on behalf of Lydia, the Chief of Party of Scale, and the senior technical team of Scale, I want to say that please take your time, just listen and give your time to all the sessions that we are going to gain from the wealth of experience of the participants. So thank you very much, and I wish us all a fruitful time all together. Thank you. Over, Henry.
Thank you so much, Mr. Elia, and thank you for always availing us your presence. We know how tight your schedule is, but every time you are with us, thank you so much. We're really grateful, and thank you for the kind words. I would like to welcome Elder Ayo Kunle with me to the house today. He will be the one to take us through. Welcome, Elder, and good to have you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Henry, for inviting me. Thank you, Emmanuel, and the entire team. Mr. Elia, thank you for being here as well, Mrs. Honor. The assignment I have this morning is simple and straightforward. I'm expected to take us through some slides in such a way and manner that will help us all to acknowledge the fact that the work that we've been doing in terms of advocacy, we all can safely and genuinely bring all the facts and the dynamics together. And that is why, for the purposes of this presentation, I will try to take a little time on the clarification of concepts before now going to the role of research and advocacy, and essentially move away from the role of research and advocacy to talk a little bit of public policy analysis as a bridge to effective advocacy, and then integrating research, as it were, into policy analysis and suo motu into advocacy campaigns. And then we collectively shall go through some case studies and best practices issues. Advocacy, you will agree with me, has become a buzzword that we use in this sector. And it is primarily because all of us are interested in achieving development. We observe some few things and we discover that there is a need for us to have some improvement. We have issues that explain to us that there are some gaps between what was said in terms of the dynamics, as it were, relating with the core objectives that was proposed and the expected outputs and outcomes. But incidentally, as the implementation of the policy or program is ongoing, we start observing some gaps, and we are expecting more, and that we want the policy actors to be mindful of this, and we want to constructively engage them to achieve the common good. So advocacy is logically reacting to the environment, and it is context driven by the motivations that we do have in terms of our excitement to have something better. Advocacy in itself is like a fruitful tree with some fruits readily available and accessible. And these are the components of the advocacy package in terms of our messages and the expectations that we do have. However, we must never forget the fact that we are doing this as a multidimensional, multivariate, multidisciplinary, and multi-stakeholder enterprise, meaning that we have stakeholders, and primarily from the non-state actors, you have the non-governmental organizations, the civil society organizations, the community-based organizations. We have all of us in the mix. And then we have these policy implementing establishments that we must. And to do a good job at doing all these things, we need to be very careful to appreciate that development agenda on its own has related with it issues of policies, citizens' needs and expectations, and there is always a history, as it were, and that there are cultural nuances. So the way and manner you want to implement a particular policy in a Yoruba environment, speaking within the context of Nigeria, is definitively not going to be the way you will implement in the Igbo or the Kanuri or the Ibibio or the TV or the Basawa communities. So we need to be careful about that. And the socio-political realities must be clearly understood that they differ from one community to the other. And each population targets or cluster of population equally differs. The way and manner you want to implement and discuss water, sanitation, and hygiene issues on a university campus is going to definitively be different from a rural setting where they do not even have access to borehole water or to tap water that is running through the faucets. You need to understand that the language must be different. All these policies oftentimes are governed by legal enactments, and a number of them are interwoven into series of other policies and dynamics that we need to understand. Therefore, research is very key to feeding into our advocacy in such a way and manner that we can affect and influence policies. But we need to understand that a policy will lead to we doing some research, and in some cases, when a policy document is a living document, you are expected to continually do research studies during the implementation of that policy in such a way and manner that it fits back. So it is not just a unidirectional, it is a multi-directional dynamics that we're dealing with. The other thing that we need to do is that in clarifying the concepts that make up the topic, you will see that we'll need to identify and have a common understanding or shared vision of the term research, policy, analysis, strategies, effective advocacy, and policy analysis. Research, which is our key word, is an articulate, conscious, deliberate, studious, and very painstaking inquiry or examination for the thoughtful consideration of any subject matter that we may have. And this subject matter that we do have in our mind are usually, in this case, expected to have been determined by the advocacy concern that we have. And to have an advocacy concern, we need to have identified that we have a problem or an issue that we want to raise. And doing that will require that we have a clear-cut understanding of where we're going to, and we want to interpret things properly. There are theories and legal considerations and underpinnings. So take, for instance, when you're discussing the dynamics of healthcare, or you want to talk about malaria and you are interested in rolling back malaria, there are theoretical positions that have to do with environmental cleanliness. There are issues of legal consideration in terms of hygiene, how the public sector management of waste and things like that. So you need to get the data. This is why research is always interested in being evidence-based, and then you now need to analyze all this data and then systematize them so that you can interpret and have inferences. And when you do have inferences, you consolidate this into a report, which you will now need to share with stakeholders. The sharing of this with stakeholders will again help you to appreciate that you were conscious, you were articulate, you were thoughtful, and that you truly and genuinely understood that research is something that cannot be done without you clearly understanding the fact that sometimes you'll have to be meticulous in terms of your methodology and come about the inductive methods and the deductive methods, and therefore it's a multidisciplinary dynamic that you're dealing with. In terms of policy, policies are codified rules. Policy as a codified rule requires that you have an agenda targeted at achieving smooth operations, that you want to draw from the available norms, values, and legal frameworks. You'll discover I'm mentioning legal frameworks because we are now talking about policy. Policies do not hang on that are embedded in a normative language based on the values and the legal frameworks. It specifies chosen actions from alternatives and potentially roles for stakeholders are clearly enunciated, and provides conditions to guide present and future decision-making. It can sometimes be referred to as high-level plan outlining of goals and procedures, especially for government state actors when they are involved in this. From this, we can easily now move to the subject term of analysis. Analysis are defined, or is defined for the understanding of all of us in attacking this topic as a detailed exploration of a subject matter, aiming for coherent knowledge and logical understanding to drive improvements in service delivery and subject expertise. It's usually an opportunity for us to organize, systematize our study in such a way that we'll gain insights from informed perspectives through which we too can have informed opinion and express such opinions in such a way that when we are constructively engaging other stakeholders, we can bring to bear some form of argument that will lead definitively to moderation, reviews, and improvement in the way things are done. Analysis helps us to break down complex issues for better comprehension, for better appreciation that will lead to proactive application. There are two major types of analysis in terms of the quantitative or qualitative. You want to be sure that you are using data in terms of polymetrics, or econometrics. That is, you are now reducing the thing to data when you're dealing with quantitative. In qualitative, you appear descriptive. And moving from there, policy analysis is the combination of you now focusing on policy, which will now say you want to do the research and derive data in such a way that you can forecast, understand all these things that governmental agencies are expected to do in order to do an assessment with which you'll be able to understand, appreciate, and receive feedback in terms of the impact. And it is a systematic knowledge utilization. For those of us who are part of Scale, it allows us to acquire knowledge and apply the knowledge in such a way and manner that brings about comprehensive approach that is your holistic. You cannot be talking about sanitation and health or hygiene without you wanting to dovetail it to education and the literacy level. And you cannot be talking of this sanitation and health without you discussing the dynamics of the construction and engineering associated with constructing toilets and public spaces that we help. This must now be couched in correct and clear language through which you can communicate. Whatsoever we are doing, the next word in terms of our topic is that of strategies. Strategies, we begin to see from the original root word that is Greek, is a long-term plan. Strategy as a long-term plan for achieving set goals in such a way and manner that usually allows us to get involved in comprehensive, holistic vision, mission, and of the stakeholders that are involved, usually help us to now put in perspective that the implementation phase cannot succeed without you having a sound formulation phase in terms of the processes and strategies. And as such, the elements of effective strategy usually include the goal orientation in terms of your planning and the resources you're allocating and the ability to adapt to the environment, like I said earlier on. The language that you're going to use if you're discussing with the highly educated is going to be different from the ones you're using to discuss with those who are semi-illiterate or completely illiterate. So it involves a lot of planning and thinking. And this is where you'll discover that we begin to use quite a number of phrases for those of us who are involved in development work. Are you going to engage yourself in appreciative inquiry? And if you are applying appreciative inquiry discourse to it, what are the components of you do strategic thinking, and what are the possibility framing that you are exposed to? Usually strategies are such that you see opportunities instead of obstacles. The opportunities allow you to surmount the perceived the obstacles in such a way that the implementation and executing of action plans can be achieved. And this is where you will discover that the information gathering analysis, which is called research in another sense, comes to bear again. Our next term, effective. When you're discussing effectiveness, you're trying to bring to the fore the ability to achieve the defined intended results that you envisioned, either as a government and individual organizations. So you must have ensured that your goals are downscaled into objectives, and some of those objectives may be strategic, some of them may just be ordinary objectives depending on the broad spectrum of what you're interested in achieving. However, at the end of the day, these must get to the level that they can be identified and linked to measurable indicators that will allow you to see that we are having some kind of impactful outcomes so that we can see competence in the operations and the service delivery. The adjective effective has many shades and meaning, but you usually see it describing something that is able to produce a desired goal. So whether you want to see it as effectivus or efficiere, working out to ensure that you accomplish and still hold something true, and the job gets done is the most important thing. Advocacy, which all of us are very familiar with, comes from the medieval Middle English of advocacy. That is, you are interceding for a particular thing to be achieved, or the French advocacy, you are pleading, or the medieval Latin of advocatia, of patronage, meaning that you'll have to be mindful the language, and this is why successful advocates are people who are renowned to have the capacity to speak the language of privileged government. You often see the cup half full instead of saying it is half empty. And then you want to use a process that will allow you, even though you want to secure a review, you are coming from a premise that the stakeholder that you are projecting your advocacy message towards see you as a partner, see you as a willing tool, an agent of change, and not somebody that is antagonistic. And this is where the interesting thing comes in, that all of us, particularly those of us from the civil society, non-governmental organization that are often referred to in peace and security work as non-state actors, must be well-intentioned. We must embark on it as a constructive engagement, and as such, we must conceptualize our advocacy in a manner that will allow the targeted stakeholder to know that we are in favor, or even when we are not in favor or willing to express some form of support, and that as we are seeking for the reconsideration and review, we are doing such in such a way and manner that will help us, literally speaking, to appreciate that we are no way connected with anything associated with undermining the system. And as such, we are excited and desirous of having the common good that are leading towards achieving integrated development. Integrated development will help us to make the stakeholder that we are approaching know that the forms of advocacy that we engage in, whether they are agenda setting or initiating a proposal or policy, the budget, advocacy, climate change and disease prevention of cancer, sickle cell anemia, or education literacy, and all those things, including empowerment, environmental protection, change, healthcare, ideological advocacy, interest group advocacy, legal amendment or review, legislative advocacy, mass advocacy, all manner of advocacies that we get involved in. With all this, we are clear that we can now begin to move into a synthetic engagement of the theme for this presentation, this webinar. From our foregoing clarification of concepts, we are very sure that successfully we brought to the fore that our motivations as part of the USAID scale in strengthening of civic advocacy for local engagement in a manner that is dependent upon knowledge capture, knowledge generation, application, and sharing. We have exhibited that advocacy as a development tool is actually hinged on the proper acquisition and application of knowledge to further enhance integrated development. Thus far, during this presentation, we've clarified that the intention of advocacy is for it to generate discourse that can easily lead to better living opportunities for the larger population, particularly the less privileged and vulnerable, giving voice to the voiceless and influencing policy reforms in critical sectors, particularly health, education, governance, and a host of others, as we earlier mentioned. So we will now be moving in terms of strategy development and putting it in perspective for advocacy. Whatever we are doing as advocates, it must be result-oriented. And as such, if it is result-oriented, we want to have a goal that will contribute to how we can improve. And to do that, you must have a desired outcome. Where do we really want to go from where or where we have found ourselves? And how do we get there in terms of the strategies that we are going to deploy? You identifying the entry points, you identify the right language to use, taking note of existing legal and policy frameworks, and appreciating that this must be done and that must be done, and this is the way to achieve. And you must have measurable targets. Specifically in terms of the forms of research that are relevant to advocacy, we want to stress the fact that it is a not one stopgap or one for all. It is always a combination of forms of research that we are going to be involved in. And that is why we said earlier on, research is painstaking. It is time-consuming. It is going to require we being very thoughtful and being determined, because you'll have to do some exploratory research to identify and define the problem or question carefully. And then you are doing constructive research. You want to be sure that the language you are going to use to project is such that you can easily, for example, when you want to approach a government entity, and particularly take, for instance, in Nigeria, where we've just succeeded in having a new change of government, you want to be sure that you do not irritate them, and you want to engage in a very meaningful discussion that will be welcoming. You want them to see you as a partner, as somebody willing to collaborate to achieve the common good. And as such, you now embark on the third form, the empirical research, which you are now going to begin to say to them, sir, I know you have now changed the definition of poor from the traditional understanding of poor to people who are conditionally poor or progressively poor, and we are now using, and you have active poor and things like that. You need to be careful the way you are approaching it. And when you're doing all this, we will now have to choose whether we are going to be qualitative or quantitative. And when you are doing this investigative research studies, you have questions that you are trying to answer. Components of a research process that will make your advocacy work out clearly will mean that we will define the purpose clearly. And this is where the next stage is something that a number of us are usually not too committed to doing. we don't want to do adequate literature review, but we need to do this literature review, not just to tick that we have done the literature review. We must do the literature review and evaluate the literature that are available on the subject matter. There are traditional conservative sources of literature. There are non-conventional that are radical, which we must equally interrogate so that we are better informed. Once you have done the traditional, non-conventional literature review, and you have put into consideration that there are theoretical issues, and where you are dealing with the policy, take for instance, you want to talk about gender-based violence. You cannot talk about gender-based violence without first discussing the issue of level of education, literacy level. You can't do it without talking about other things. And this is where, for those of us who are involved in development work, we need to be very familiar with the sustainable development goals. When you are familiar with the sustainable development goals, we will see the interconnectivity. You cannot discuss peace and security without first talking about health security, food security. You cannot talk about all this without going back to climate change. And usually you'll see some little nuggets. And this is where you are now going to be able to delineate your hypothesis. Once you are clear with the hypothesis, your research design will be such that will help you in the next couple of issues associated in terms of the process. You are able to now have a research design and then do your population definition and description. Technically speaking, all these sets of data and information I've been sharing are geared towards you achieving something that is comprehensive, holistic, comprehensive, and that you are not leaving any stone unturned. You want to ensure that you cover the field. It is thereafter that you now begin to gather the data, you collate them, you systematize them so that it is easy. And the next stage that is going to be dealing with the analysis of this data. And like we've said earlier on, analysis of data will help you clearly in such a way that you will avoid bias. I will plead with you, we need to avoid biases. And once you are able to avoid biases, and you even note it as part of the limitations of your study, that there's a tendency for when you want to discuss deification as it relates with the dynamics of WASH, for example, you must avoid stereotypes so that it is easier for you to move to the next level and your report will be very objective. And once your report is objective, you will now see clearly that the types of research relevant to advocacy, and again, you'll discover that this brings us back to the issue that we have been raising, that this advocacy business that we are all engaged in is multidimensional, multi-sector, evolving, multidisciplinary. You'll see that you will have to combine types of research. It is not just one form of research or type of research. You do open research, you do operations research, you do participatory action research, psychological research methods, and then you must be able to appreciate the research integrity, because if you're now talking about HPV vaccine, you want to be sure that the report that they are using is the same one that was properly done and objectively done. Research-intensive cluster typology is to ensure that what you are doing is clearly understood, and then you do social research. Some of the outstanding case studies that we can adduce include WASH. WASH campaign is a very good case study for us at any point in time. And then the security sector reforms, the electoral reforms, a number of us have been involved. And that is why you'll discover that the highly matured individuals that are engaged in this advocacy business, you'll discover they understand that policies have a lifespan. A policy is actually expected to serve for 10 years, but there must be a midterm review at the 5th year. And this is why if people are discussing electoral reforms again, the last electoral act was put in place 2022. Now, after the election of 2023, we've observed some few things. Number of people are now arguing, oh, we need to now tinker with the act. No, that is not the right way to go. The correct way to go for statecraft students like us is that we now say this is an existing policy that has been analyzed and we want to bridge it. We must support and say what were the gaps in the implementation in this first year? What are the things we need to do? And say, since it is not up to 5 years, we need to now do ABC and work towards ensuring that by the 5th year, the existing act and policy that was pushed out at a particular year 0 is clearly implemented with all the things understood, and we can now begin to say we are moving towards a new one that is prescriptive in nature. And if it is prescriptive, we want to be careful to ensure that the processes of advocacy that we are deploying is clearly focused. Our advocacy must be completely a focused matter relating to the policy analysis. And this is where many people get it wrong because they do not want to contextualize with the identified problems and ensure that series of verifications are done. And then we want to determine the evaluation of assessment criteria. Are they true? Are they objective? And things like that. And then you must dovetail this assessment into the legal and the policy frameworks in such a way that you can do correlational assessment. What is the correlation that exists between the national health policy and WASH? What is the real challenge of these associated with security, the climate change discourse, and you do a multivariate analysis of specific policies in correlation with relevant and alternate legal and policy frameworks. A number of these will involve you adopting your analysis. Either you are going to be using the SWOT, you are going to be doing gap and content analysis or context analysis, or you are using the PESO framework. Therefore, to implement, you are doing such implementation with M&E component that is very robust. The approaches to policy analysis that are key to us is such that will allow us to see glaringly that we are dealing with some issues that will make us to become analysis-centric, or we are policy process-centric. We are focusing on the issues of approaches of our policy analysis. It's either you are just going to be more analysis-centric or policy process, or that you are meta policy. And this meta policy adopts a system and context-based perspective with which you can do a lot of macro issues, and you are combining analysis-centric modes with the policy process. And this is why we were saying earlier on, please, this is an enterprise. Advocacy is an enterprise that requires that we must be mindful of the 5E approach. It is painstaking, it is demanding, so that we are effective, we are efficient, and we are so conscious and mindful of the ethical considerations, and we are able to evaluate the alternatives so that we can safely establish recommendations for positive change. So you'll now be asking me, how do we succeed in doing this, particularly for those of us who are stakeholders that have minimal capacity in terms of manpower? It means that all of us must build a team. There must be elements of team building, shared vision in such a way and manner that multiple brainstorming sessions are held by those of us on the team. And then we must have what is called trust and confidence building. That is internally and externally. To achieve team building and trust and confidence building, it is hinged on a series of training and capacity building. And that is why you'll discover that Palladium is trying to make it possible under the USAID scale project to build our capacity using the ACIOE to ensure that training is being done through series of all these things so that we can have joint planning for effective problem solving, so that we have joint problem solving orientation, and all of us see ourselves as members of the same team. Often you'll discover that you are not trying to reinvent the wheel, but you are just harnessing and galvanizing resources that are already available out there, for which network building and strengthening is the key. So that the next point, which has to do with strengthening our capacity, may include we swapping roles. A number of program officers just think that they are program officers alone. They need to combine their roles with research. They need to understand what it is like to do series of brainstorming, to understand how they go about doing research so that they are successful. Because whether you want to do policy analysis or you want to do strategic planning, everything is rooted and based strongly on the same dynamics of research. Be it strategic planning, be it policy analysis, you want to identify the problem, you want to do the analysis, and then you are getting towards the developing a strategy for policy, engagement, development, policy implementation, and then the enactment must be rooted on that so that the implementation leads you to logical conclusion. The same thing for formulating strategy. You need to have clear-cut missions that are defined, and then your goals are so clear and smart, as we always say, so that we can examine the internal and external issues and create frameworks for analysis, be you using SWOT, be you using PESTLE and the host of that, so that you can now come up with a strategy. Once you have the strategy, you already are in a position to do the correct thing. We have indirectly discussed some of the basic interesting case studies that we can lay hold of claim on. I will just highlight WASH and say to us that many a times we want to advocate some few things, but we do not want to be procedural. There used to be a time that children and teachers had arrangements of how to bring water from their homes in tons and cycles so that we can wash hands in the school. We may need to understand that the local environment will determine how we're engaging this. A good example again is we cannot take away the subject of constructing the kind of latrines that are useful and friendly to the communities. you must understand that, okay, occasionally you need to break it down, like all of us today now are now discussing that, 360 members of the House of Assembly, House of Representatives are now buying 160 million naira worth of SUV vehicles. If that is true, you can easily communicate to people in such a way. Once you have done your research properly, you will find out how much it costs to buy a brand new and a used borehole drilling equipment. Now, not necessarily the industrial one, you find out how much it is, and you tell them that to buy a borehole drilling equipment costs 50 million, for example, and that this 50 million equipment can be used on a daily basis to keep on drilling boreholes in different communities. So within 1 year, this is the number of boreholes that would have been drilled by this machine. So in 4 years, 48 months, that member of House of Representatives would have been in the house using the vehicle, this is what it will translate to. But you are not doing it as an emotional thing. You are just doing it as something that will help him to appreciate that there is a better alternate way that will bring common good and community engagement, and citizens will benefit objectively, and the impact will be far-reaching. The same thing for polio, the same thing for rollback malaria, and the electoral reform and security reform. And this is where I will talk about police reform a bit. A number of us have not been able to truly appreciate that we need to read a lot. For example, the Nigerian Police Act 2020 talks essentially of many things, but unfortunately, we have not been involved in following through. I'll give you a good example. Section 60 says that for every police formation, there must be a legal officer whose main primary responsibility is to ensure compliance. To follow suit, and actually before the act was passed, there was a Police Force Order 20 that was signed in 2017, which the act again reinforces, talking in terms of this. But unfortunately, some legal practitioners formed what is called the Solicitor's Duty Network. It was unfortunate in the sense that now the Solicitor's Duty Network is available, but it was streamlined only to accommodate legal practitioners without understanding that the Solicitor's Network will require you to have many more rights activists and people that are in the interland that will help us to do the monitoring and evaluation that will ensure that every police formation does what is right. And then now you have a situation where magistrates are expected by this same Police Act. So as we are proceeding, the knowledge of the existence of the provisions of the law, the knowledge of the existence of the nuances of the security strategy of the Nigerian state, the knowledge of all these things will help us to truly engage, and we will not just be interested in being donor-driven in such a way and manner that restricts our participation and engagement in the process. I do want to thank you for this privileged opportunity to share my thoughts with you and for us to engage with the questions and answers. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Elder Fawumi, for that. It's been really engaging, really educating, a lot of learning experience, a lot of insights on how to really use research and policy analysis in the work that we do as advocates. I already see a lot of comments in the comment section. If you please, sir, turn on your video for us again as we try to take some of the questions that have come in. from the participants. While I can see them putting in their appreciation and commendation on such a very insightful and well put together presentation. The first question, I'd like us to just go straight into it. It's around the paucity of data in Nigeria, right? So the participant is asking that they saw a lack of readily available data for critical work that people are doing in advocacy, and seeing as you've helped them to understand how important research is in advocacy, how do you go about this research when you don't even have the data that you need to do a proper work?
The truth is that we have more than enough data in the Nigerian state. The Nigerian system has more than enough data to engage with. The problem is that a number of us are not willing to actually do what we are supposed to do. How do I mean? Information fly across on a daily basis, but we do not archive them. And since we do not archive them, we do not think that they are going to be useful for us. So the data is available. It is how do you, as a stakeholder, recognize that this is a data that is going to be useful for your work? How do you ensure that we do not fall into the pit of what President Obasanjo said, that just ensure that the information is contained in a text because they will not read? We are all involved in poverty reduction in Nigeria. I can ask how many of us know that we've had series of poverty reduction strategy papers. These poverty reduction strategy papers actually started as far back as the 60s. And you have the National Development Agenda plans. And if you are sincere, the 1970 to 75 development plan is what we have been repackaging either as Vision 2010, Vision 2020, needs, seeds, and things like that. So if we are involved in development, each one of us must get all this data, these publications, and ensure that we have them at in our library. Let me just put it that way. The next thing is this: there are a number of legal enactments. When you go to the average NGO office that they say we are rights activists, and I always ask when I do capacity assessment, where are your collections of the laws of the Federation of Nigeria? A number of NGOs involved in rights activism and programming do not have in their library the volumes of the laws of the Federation of Nigeria. We do not have copies of the law reports from where we can easily extract the case laws. And so we engage processes without this required resource. And then we quickly jump at saying we don't have data. The data is available. It is that all of us are lazy. And I'm sorry I have to be this blunt. We are lazy. Ima, in between the two of us now, I sent you slides of 37 pages. You had to systematize to 27 without losing anything. If you were lazy, you won't do the due diligence. If I was lazy, I won't put all the materials I put in there with which you can now say, sir, for the time that we have to scale down and use this. Now, anybody who is involved in research must be willing to be intentional, must be willing to be disciplined, to say, I don't know if this is going to be relevant. I'll give you a good example. We talk about the literacy level in Nigeria, then we dovetail into issue of politics and dynamics thereof and health. But all of us forget the fact that annually, governments at the national, state, or the local government make statements in the course of the year. UNDP publishes things. We just allow it to sleep. We don't need to allow it to sleep. Now we must consciously gather all these things. You cannot be talking about school enrollment without you knowing that you do not just going to have it in just one document. There are a number of things that you will need to articulate. WAEC does exam every year. NECO does exam and they publish. JAM coordinates exam and they publish the data. Enough data is available. It's our willingness to be disciplined and thorough to know that those data are available. A good example again, when it comes to hospital healthcare, the hospitals publish their reports. And when they go for defense of appropriation, be it at the state or at the federal level, they talk in terms of these were the number of cases that happened, this and this and that. All we need to do is to just keep on ensuring that we store this data. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much I can see how passionate you are about the subject of research. And I believe all participants have taken that as a call for action to really leverage the data we have available to us, go out and search for it, and then use it for your work in advocacy. Edna Ishaya is asking a question around SWOT analysis. So she's asking, is SWOT analysis specific to each policy?
SWOT analysis, interestingly, is just one of the many frameworks of analysis that you are supposed to do. SWOT says strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. SWOT, I will say to you, is the most rudimentary of the multivariate analysis frameworks. The very rudimentary and pedestrian analytic frameworks are usually binary, but you need to understand that you must elevate the discourse to having multivariate analysis. For example, if you want to do a good job, when you are discussing the SWOT, as it were, you're applying SWOT, you want to apply SWOT to say, we have identified that these are the stakeholders. When you do the stakeholder mapping, because that is one component of doing your research for this, you'll now say this stakeholder A, I'm applying this framework called SWOT to stakeholder A. What are the strengths of this particular stakeholder? Is he an organization? Is he a state actor, non-state actor? Why is this relevant? And all those things, you've done all that. And then you now say, okay, for you to handle water sanitation, wash properly, you identify, for example, in the northern Nigeria, and say you have an ulama system, a malam, in charge of a particular mosque as a stakeholder. Why is he a relevant stakeholder? What are the strengths he has? Every morning, he presides at 5 a.m. over prayers, and he has 150 persons worship in his mosque and pray every morning. That is the strength in terms of his reach. If and when you want to enter into such a community and you do not consider him as a strategic partner, you are going to be missing. If you are successful in identifying him, what are the weaknesses associated with him in a multi-religious community? It means that if you rely too much on him, he is not likely to have people, as it were, from the other faith and religion easily come under his purview. And this is why when you look at an organization like the Christian Broadcasting Network, CBN, they have succeeded in their Operation Good Samaritan because they do their stakeholder mapping very well, and then they do their entry strategy in such a way and manner that they are able to reach out. So when they want to do borehole, they do community brainstorming and sessions for shared vision. And the community will now say, this is where we want this borehole. And I will never forget one particular episode. The women had to request that the borehole cannot be put in the center of the community. It must be taken slightly out so that they will have some time out to be away from home, and peradventure they have to send their children. Their children too will have an opportunity to walk some distances, and if and when, if they as their parents needed to do some family planning dynamics, they can do it. But if you are just doing the prescriptive thing, you will just put it in the center of the community, and like in some cases, after a while, they will not maintain it. But because it was a community, both the Muslim women and the Christian women that said, this is where we want it, they were using and maintaining it, and no problems. So these are the issues that we need to appreciate as we are going on. We cannot say only this framework. I've talked about PESO. Some of us use what is called STIPO. In my organization, we use what is called SEPSAD. And you have to be saying, what is your P? Your P in some cases will be PESO of policy. Your C or your P will be practice. Your E is environment, your E is economy, your E is education. So you cannot easily say just only one framework. You must be willing, and this is where you cannot do the research and policy analysis for advocacy as an individual. You need a team, and the team must be willing to work together. And once you finish a little stage of it at the internal level, you must network with the other stakeholders that are involved, particularly the target stakeholder. For example, when you are talking of WASH, you need the Ministry of Health, you need the hospitals, you need the environmental sanitation agency and things like that, and then the waste management board.
Thank you so much, sir. So you should not preempt what structure or format you would use. I think in your design process, you know if you want to use the pencil or the SWOT, and you tailor it to exactly what your ask is. And I like the illustration you used, the example you used, right? So one of the forms of advocacy we like to push for is advocacy by, right? So you don't just tell people that this is what I want to come and do for you, but you understand that it's actually an issue for them. So probably knew that the community needed water, but they told you where exactly they wanted the borehole to be drilled for some very interesting reasons. Okay, we're running out of time, so we just take I think the final question here before we do the post test and bid our participants goodbye. And so Grace is asking, she's first of all thanking you for the presentation, and she's asking what is the best way to track advocacy policy agenda outcomes?
The tracking means that you already have a very robust feedback management system, and that your monitoring and evaluation schema is such that is vibrant and dynamic. To do this, you will need to combine series of the following. One, exchanges and correspondences between the stakeholders and amongst the stakeholders involved in that sector. And this is where we need a lot of strategic partnering and forging of networks, where information sharing is very key, and you hold periodic consultations. The next has to do with media monitoring and content of the media messages or reportage that you are receiving from such platforms. A number of us watch television news programming and we hardly extract anything. You need to have an officer who is involved in that in your organization. We listen to radio, but we don't hear anything. And this is where, for some of us, I have a very senior colleague of the Nigerian state who will always trouble me and say, Fagbemi, what is the correct analysis of what has been in the media in the last 24 hours? Because he knows that the way I listen and watch news is different from the way an average person is watching and doing what has to be done. When you do news publication reading, there are coded messages which you will now have to decode so that you can build it into your work. A lot has to be done in that regard. And more importantly, you do not assume, you do not stereotype, you do not engage only with the mindset of critiquing. You engage with the mindset of saying, this was the data we used. Do we have any improvement so far? Are you willing for us to update this data? And as such, you are contributing. A good example, all of us were around in 2020 when we had COVID. I don't know if we have done any follow-up studies like they are doing now in Europe and in North America. The effect of those who the effect of the vaccine on those who receive the vaccines in hospitals. Those things are being done over there, but here, because we are just episodic, we don't do a follow-up. We must be willing to do follow-up. When you are engaged in advocacy work, you need to do a lot of following up. And I will want to plead, and this is where I appreciate you said over the years, do not be donor-driven. Do not be donor-driven. Many civil society actors are just donor-driven. They just, okay, this is where the money is. They move in that direction. You just finish the advocacy in that area and you forget it. No. And this is where we must be careful, particularly those of us who do the capacity assessment for grant worthiness, must be mindful that these are people that can sustain themselves on this trajectory. we need to be careful so that we are sure that our continued contribution will help. And this is why I really respect what Mr. Elias said to us at the beginning, that I have been monitoring what is going on. You started with maybe 100, 200 participants, and the number is dropping. Yes, there is webinar fatigue. Okay, what else do we need to do? Is already thinking in that direction. And we too must now say to ourselves, we are serious. The data is always available. It is how dynamic and willing we are. So I plead with you, Grace, kindly understand that this agenda is for those of us who are interested in doing marathon race. It is usually a long-term thing. Those who are wanting to do Austin Bolt can do a dash, but those who do the 8,000 meters and things like that, which is 8-kilometer marathon, are usually very healthy than those of us who just do a dash, and they stay a longer time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I think that's just the perfect note to wrap up the conversation. It is the journey of advocacy is a marathon and not a sprint. Thank you so much, Elder Ayokunle Fagbemi, for your time. I really appreciate it, and we definitely will keep in touch and hope to take you along with us, and of course our participants on our journey towards improving the advocacy landscape in Nigeria vis-a-vis Africa. Thank you so much, sir, for your time.
I'm very grateful. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, sir. And so at this point, I'd like to invite Mrs. Ona Peters, the Legal Public Policy and Government Relations Manager here at ACIUE Associates, who would give some closing remarks on the behalf of the managing partner.
Good morning. Good morning, participants. We thank you so much for still being with us. Elder Fagbemi, that was a very insightful and educative presentation. There was one quote you made at the beginning that when you talked about the tree, and that research is like a tree that has a fruitful tree with some fruits readily available and accessible for us to pluck. And then you then took a deep dive and showed us how we can get the fruits from that tree. And there's something also insightful. You said that when you listen to the news and you are reading the news and in your daily interactions, you are always looking at it with the scope and the lens of an advocate. That's a very good takeaway that I'm going to also start practicing. So I'm not just listening to the news like every other person, but I'm looking at it, trying to tease out every information that I can get. Another thing you said is you took notes of everything that might be useful now or in future. So those are really good tips when we are going to advocate for any policy change that is beneficial to us and to the community. I'm also quite glad the way you brought out all the various tools that we can use in our advocacy. Thank you so very much. You presented various tools, not just SWOT analysis, but so many other things that we can use in our advocacy. And then also key is that we are doing it not for us, we are partners with the people we're advocating to, and the community that we intend to benefit from our advocacy. So thank you very much for a very insightful and very educative presentation. Thank you, participants, for your engaging questions. And like my colleague said, Emmanuel, we'll give you all the materials, and then we're available to answer any further questions or inquiries you want or you may need. Thank you very much. We thank USAID and Palladium for making this series of trainings available to us. Thank you once again, Elder Fagbemi, for your insightful and very educative presentation. Thank you once again, and all of you have a great day and a great week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.